I hope tea can solve this. I'm feeling rough as a badger's ass. When you have something like I've got primary progressive multiple sclerosis, when you get just normal illness, it affects you quite a lot, and it can affect my cognition more, but particularly my mobility gets affected. So I'm shuffling around like some kind of octogenarian. Nonetheless, I just thought I'd start with that and this comment from a viewer. Although we differ in our view of this war, I believe you're a good bloke. So, that's nice. But, here comes a but. As you have health problems, I've noticed over time your health is definitely affected, as in you are aging terrible. Please keep things in perspective. Thanks, mate. I'm aging terribly. Yeah. Well, that was a nice way to start the day. Anyway, let's go to the Ukrainian general staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. Please check the caveats out in the description to the video below. And there are some phenomenally high figures again today. Personnel losses are over 1,000, 1,090. It's a very high number. And that shows that things are pretty active in a number of places. The Ukrainians are probably doing something other than just seeing an attrition of Russian forces in their attacking. And indeed, there are some claims, although I have no provenance for these sort of claims. So if you look here, War Monitor says Ukrainian long-range artillery, what does that mean? Probably HIMARS, hit and destroyed in the past day 12 concentrations of troops, weapons and military equipment. 12 of that kind of, I don't know, depot, billeting, whatever, troops and equipment. 2 air defense systems, 1 ammunition depot, 5 artillery systems, and 1 radar station of Russian forces. I think the radar station was in Crimea, from what I can gather. But the Ukrainians have arguably been very active in their distant strikes, even though we don't necessarily see footage from this, and we don't pick up first-hand indications that verify these claims. They are out there. Now, that could lead, probably does lead into these claims of 1,090 personnel being lost, and we've had high numbers, various categories over the last few days, in fact, the last week or so. 10 tanks, okay, pretty decent number. Losing 10 tanks in a day is fairly careless, but not the highest. And 32 armoured personnel vehicles is certainly a high number. And I think when you lose that many APVs, that probably shows the Russians are attacking in some places and are losing them in attack. It usually spikes when the Russians are attacking, but it could be that a repair facility's been hit or some other place with an accumulation of equipment. 51 artillery systems is a very high number. There's no doubt about that. That is a bad day of losses for the Russians. 2 multiple launch rocket systems, 40 vehicles and fuel tanks is significant, and 4 pieces of special equipment. So this is another really bad day for the Russians. The Ukrainians are doing a very decent job at taking out Russian equipment. Now, the question is, how verifiable are these claims? You know, are we justified in believing them? That's my project every day, is trying to work out whether we are, and I think we are broadly somewhat justified in believing these. What the percentage is, I don't know, but even if you took 30% off, if you took a full third off these figures, you'd still have almost 700 personnel lost. You would have 20 odd APVs. You would have what's a third of that, so that's what, 17 maybe, 17, 18 artillery systems. Just off that, which would be what, 34 artillery systems. Just incredibly high numbers still. So there, for me, there is no doubt that Russia are being attrited at tremendously high levels. And then when you look at the actual verification, or at least, you know, something of a verification of these figures with confirmed visual losses that in this case have been compiled by Andrew Perpetua, you can see that the loss stats are again at a sort of 5-to-1 loss ratio, Russian to Ukrainian losses. I don't know, maybe 5 or 6-to-1, something like that. That's certainly intuitive look there, especially when one of these, you know, as noted by Andrew, is just tickled at the bottom. That's a Panzerhaubitze 2000. We're going to come and look at that actually in a second, because that's interesting. I just noticed Lancer was too excited and couldn't hold on. I'll explain that in a second. So anyway, Panzerhaubitze 2000 you think is high value, but actually it's unlikely to have been damaged. Boat has been sunk. We've got T-72, T-64, C-90, C-9040C, Lancet. I'm not sure this ID is right, so it may not be that, and it's damaged. Don't know about the damage there. A few bits and pieces, but not particularly high value. Then when you look at the Russian losses, there are more destroyed and abandoned there than damaged in key categories. We'll look at a couple of boats have been destroyed. There's activity from the Ukrainians against the Russians on probably the Dnipro River. We have a large number of tanks destroyed, but it's interesting that Andrew's not identifying those tanks, so they must be significantly burnt out. And I don't know whether that is new footage or something's happened relatively recently. Yeah, a couple of identified tanks to add to that. Then IFVs that are not identified either. So it'd be interesting to know what footage that is. I mean, you can look at this. Of course, we know that the footage is indicated on the original. Come out of here on the original document that Andrew shows here. The footage is linked to the right hand side. So you know, if I had time, I could go and check that all out. I just do that at the moment. So anyway, going back, a huge number of infantry fighting vehicles, trucks and civilian vehicles. So all in all, there is just a massive Russian equipment lost. A huge ratio of losses, Russian losses to Ukrainian losses, that I think obviously very much suits the Ukrainians, and also leads us to believe that these figures are at least somewhat correct. The issue on a daily basis is artillery systems. Those when the Ukrainians post really high numbers of artillery systems, not often that you see those high numbers reflected in Andrew Perpetua's list. Now, as I've said many times before, this skews towards FPVs, FPV drones, and drones dropping munitions, and yet artillery is very rarely that. I mean, it is obviously sometimes, as you can see here, artillery, drone drop bombs, FPV, but in order to do that, the artillery's got to be fairly close. Assuming that most drones operate to a 10-kilometer range from the front line, that means that your artillery is going to have to be 10 kilometers away from the front line, which is quite rare, or at least should be quite rare. It also shows that the Russian artillery is being brought much closer than it should be being brought, possibly because of barrel wear, inaccuracy, a whole host of reasons, or ammunition. But mainly, those pieces of artillery are going to be outside of regular drone range, and so it's normally counter battery fire. And the question is, well, do they have footage of that? You're going to assume they're going to be spotting for that, but there's for some reason a footage of artillery losses of artillery, but also as a result of artillery, don't feature as much on Andrew's list here. So the question is, well, why is that? There's definitely a difference in that category. It's not to say that that is untrue, but it's just that there's a selection bias going on here that doesn't support verification of artillery losses. Right, going on here, we have speaking of drones, Dmitry from War Translated saying Russian military reporter Dvar Majora states just how effective Ukrainian drone work has become. According to his post, one Russian assault squad, after taking up a building, received 19 drones almost instantly into it. Just the second half of the post. I didn't include the first one for reasons. If you're really keen, you can look it up. So we hear an awful lot of differing accounts of who has the advantage in drones on the front line. There are a number of claims to Russian production advantages, and that they are exacting quite a toll on troops and trenches and dugouts of the Ukrainians, but they aren't doing an awful lot against Ukrainian equipment, almost certainly because there isn't that much Ukrainian equipment near the front line. They're kind of keeping it in reserve for offensives, which they probably aren't going to plan for another best part of a year at least, and so the Russians are therefore going to be skewing their attacks towards troops and dugouts and trenches. So you hear some claims that the Russians are sending more, and then you hear some claims that the Ukrainians are sending more, and that the Ukrainians have electronic warfare advantage here, and the Russians have electronic warfare advantage there. So it's a real mixed bag of nuts when it comes to the narratives. However, recently I've been hearing a number of things from Russian sources to suggest that the Ukrainians really are ramping up drone usage. Here, this source says drones are a separate matter. Recently, in one of the directions, 19 FPV drones flew into a building just occupied by assault squad. 19 immediately. I mean, this is obviously something really shocking and a real problem for the Russians. That is, the enemy had 19 drone operators on standby. But you got to recognize that actually the logistics that are involved, or the capacity and capability involved in operating 19 drones at once into one target means that there are 19 drone operators, or the drone operators are very, very good at operating their drones and then getting the next one up and going again. I don't know how many drone operators, but up to 19 drone operators slamming drones one after another into a building. That is an incredible capability of the Ukrainians. They are replacing again, as we said, artillery with drones. That might be something that would have been done by artillery previously. Right, we need to hammer that building. Let's bring in the mortars. Let's bring in the artillery, the howitzers to bear on that building. No, now there's 19 drones being thrown in there, and it's arguably cheaper than sending in the artillery. So anyway, that is, the enemy had 19 drone operators on standby. Maybe they were women, but for our people, it didn't matter who it came from, even if they were controlled by a transgendered dog. It tells you all you need to know about his mindset. And this is only one direction. In others, Ukrainian armed forces drones buzz in the sky around the clock. They don't spare 3 or 4 drones for one of our motorized riflemen. Baba Yagas, so there's big octocopters that drop quite a number, and we'll come to them in a second, have become a problem. Ukrainian repeaters. So not only do they drop lots of munitions, but some of them are acting as motherships and dropping multiple other drones, and they act as repeaters for the drone signal, so that you can add another 10 kilometers to the range that the Baba Yaga has. That then allows you to hit. So we go back to this, and you see. Oh, sorry, not that. Go back to here, and you see. Okay, some of these pieces of artillery have been hit by drones, FPV drone. Well, that could be an FPV drone dropped by a Baba Yaga that then has a 20-kilometer range, which then means, oh goodness, those pieces of artillery are within range of drones. So significant. Baba Yagas have become a problem. Ukrainian repeaters, effective range. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians are crying, misleading, trying to get us to relax. The Ukrainian is playing a fool, and our media are often happy to pick up the enemy's theses. So I don't quite understand this, but it could be that the Ukrainians are, because this is what I talk about, mixed messaging. Ukrainians are often claiming that the Russians have got a technological and production advantage over the Ukrainians. But that could also be disinformation. It could be something to scare partners into supporting them more, and it could be lulling the Russians into a false sense of security. But actually, something different is happening on the front line. And the Ukrainians are, this is pure speculation, but appears to be what he's saying. Misleading us, trying to get us to relax. They're crying. They're whinging about drone advantages for the Russians. Misleading, trying to get us to relax. Oh, we're all right, we've got a drone advantage. Meanwhile, they're getting absolutely hammered. False sense of security. So the Ukrainians are playing a fool, and our media are often happy to pick up the enemy's theses. It really got better at the front. Supply shells and equipment began to improve, but it's too early to rejoice, especially about the assessments of the Ukrainian that he gives in the media, that's for sure. There's a bit of confusion there, and I wonder whether he's saying that actually our supplies, so the Russian supplies, shells and equipment, has begun to improve, and that's probably as a result of things like North Korean artillery ammunition, and of course ramped up production by the Russians themselves, finding its way to the front line. There's also talk that Chinese equipment might be coming via Belarus. But I need to look into that. That would be super worrying if that is the case. Now, a Russian reporter, Filatov, demonstrated footage where Russian Altel drone rammed a Ukrainian Baba Yaga drone bomber. In his words, a Baba Yaga carrying heavy bombs that can destroy a building was hovering over a Russian position somewhere in Avdiivka. So there's a Baba Yaga, and this Altel hits it, and I believe both drones were downed. And that's obviously a big loss because Baba Yagas are very useful and a lot more expensive than your small FPV drones. So when the second, obviously leading to the loss of both drones. When the second Baba Yaga emerged, another Altel was sent in the air, but ramming was not an option as Russians would lose aerial sight. Filatov says troops were moved to another position, thus the status quo remained. So there's this air battle taking place. I've seen a number of bits of footage recently of air battles, not with Baba Yagas, but with other FPV drones on each other or drone, IED dropping drones. This is happening quite a bit because there are so many drones in the air and drones from differing sides. You've got contested battle space. You've got one side sending out the drones to hammer the enemy soldiers who are advancing, and you got the other side sending up drones to hammer the enemy soldiers who are defending. And so you're going to have a contested airspace for drones, and that's going to result in drones bashing into each other and trying to take each other out. But the Baba Yaga there, they didn't want to lose the Altel, and I don't know what that signifies, whether there weren't enough of these half-decent drones for the Russians to use to waste one on taking out a Baba Yaga. But you think, actually, Baba Yaga taking one of them out would be good. They'd already taken one out down. Filatov adds that they're constantly trying to come up with something to combat this crap, this Baba Yaga. So obviously for the Russians, the Baba Yagas, as we heard from that other source, are a nuisance for the Russians. The Ukrainians are using them effectively, potentially in different ways. Now, we're going to go to talk about this strike on a Panzerhaubitze 2000. So this is a German-provided, very decent self-propelled howitzer. Not many of these have been destroyed. I don't know if any have been outright destroyed. Some of them have been taken back to be fixed. I don't know that any have been outright destroyed. Anyway, this is the SPG being targeted by, they've received 14 of these. It's got a cage and camo netting, so it's kind of somewhat prepared for drones. However, the Lancet targeting the Panzerhaubitze was equipped with the new LiDAR warhead, which detonated too early, making a penetration impossible. Okay, what's going on there? Well, when I look at the Lancet wiki page, it doesn't mention LiDAR at all here. Those are the Lancets and the famous X-shaped wings that can make it quite difficult, actually, to control in certain contexts. But I found this article, which is the LiDAR technology, similar to, in principle, to radar, sorry, but employing laser or infrared light, enables the drone to measure distances with pinpoint accuracy. So it's measuring using lasers on board the Lancet, distance from the Lancet to the target. The resulting data clears the drone, allowing it to activate its explosive charge from a safe distance. So it explodes before the target, ensuring maximal penetration. So some of these, you get these from sort of differing munitions. Sort of the javelin top down explodes before, and then the explosive force, penetrates the weak part of the armor. Well, this is the same kind of principle, where it explodes before the target and then penetrates it. Specifically, the video illustrates the drone's operation. Sizable Lancet rapidly closing the gap before detonating, directing explosive force on a vehicle's vulnerable spot. This is on a Bradley, by the way, the video it's talking about. The distinctive feature observed on these drones is a pair of small cameras forming part of the LiDAR system, positioned near the guidance sensor the UAV's front. The exact type of explosive used, whether a traditional shaped charge or an explosively formed penetrator, EFP, a type feared for its effectiveness against armor, remains unidentified. So, this is what the LiDAR does, but we can see here on the video that actually, so this is the Panzerhaubitze 2000. Resolution's obviously 4 here, but you can pretty much see what happens. and then we have the drone coming down here and exploding before it reaches the Panzer howitzer. And there, so it explodes on this part of the road, and then unfortunately for the Russians, that explosion was too soon, and it was too far for it to penetrate. It needed, really, as far as I can work out, it really needed to explode about here, penetrate into the Panzer howitzer, but I don't know how far that is, maybe 10 meters or so too early, and as a result didn't affect, by all accounts, the self-propelled gun, which has led Andrew Perpetua to put the Panzer howitzer 2000 was tickled. Lancer was too excited and couldn't hold on. Bit of whatever. So Russia on fire here. Moving on to other bits and pieces of hits and losses. This is in the Vladimir region of Russia. Bizarrely, it's apparently a building where a shoe warehouse burnt down. Sorry, I had to pause that while I died a little bit off camera. Anyway, that is another big fire in Russia. Then a blast and smoke was seen rising out of a thermal power plant in Moscow. Another short circuit, apparently. This is fairly significant. Power outage in Moscow, potentially. And we'll come back to that because I think it's connected. Anyway, just to give some more detail, Tim White says officials say a cable was damaged as a host of fire crews raced to the power plant in Moscow after the explosion. However, officials say the alert is now over. Power supplies were not affected. I'm guessing backup kicked in, but there's likely damage. So who knows what happened there, whether that was a strike, whether it was for maintenance, or whether it was partisan activity. I don't know. Anyway, coming on to distant strike standoff munitions, there were 14 out of 20 Shaheeds shot down last night, which is over 50%, so better than the previous night in terms of percentage of Shaheeds intercepted. But still, 6 Shaheeds will be finding their targets somewhere inside Ukraine, and that will be causing problems to the Ukrainians. So there are, I'm sure, there will be significant damage to either military or energy or other critical infrastructure that is taking place on, at the moment, a fairly consistent basis inside Ukraine. Included in that is another attack on Kharkiv. There was a fire in a residential area after the strike by a drone. So one of the drones possibly hitting Kharkiv, or possibly being intercepted and falling down. All clear has been sounded, so that happened. And then a drone was shot down over Tsukov Oblast in Russia, according to the Russians. The Russian Ministry of Defense did not report any casualties or damage resulting from the attempted drone strike. So there seemed to be some fairly significant strikes into Russia last night, and most of the focus is on St. Petersburg. So last night, explosions occurred in St. Petersburg, which could be heard. The explosions could be heard across the city. So here we have evidence of an explosion taking place. Actually, this is probably a better image there, or piece of video. You see quite a large explosion in the back of that kind of CCTV footage over there. So I'll let that play again. There we go. Big bright explosion. No report says St. Petersburg was again attacked by drones this night. Russian media writes that one of the drones fell on the territory of the Nevsky Mazut oil refinery, after which a fire started there. So you can hear sort of various iterations of that. And here, War Translated says, another incident in St. Petersburg, but this time an unidentified flying object landed bang in the middle of the city at the Nevsky Mazut plant at 4:47 in the morning local time. There is damage to the oil or fuel tanks and vehicles, but the extent is unclear. St. Petersburg authorities were allegedly testing disabling GPS signal over the city in the earlier days to prevent navigation of UFOs. Perhaps this was not effective this time. On the videos, a loud bang picked up by CCTV can be heard. So there have been strikes on their reactions to that by Russians. Not many photos coming out. This is significant because Putin was visiting St. Petersburg, or is due to, and so they're playing around with kind of disabling GPS and trying to mess around with signals so that drones struggle, but it still seems to have been hit, and still seems to be focused on energy infrastructure and possibly also power as well. So why this is, I guess this is the right time to talk about that. I'm not going to go to yet. Let's go to what I was going to talk about, which is, Russia's internet is down. So I think we can possibly connect hacking attempts also to power going down in certain places, to strikes on St. Petersburg. Russia residents across the country are reporting outages for websites in the .ru domain for over an hour. Reports United 24. Government services are unavailable. Russian residents are experiencing problems with bank cards and online orders. Another electrical substation in Russia exploded, says Tendar. This time it happened in the Moscow region, as I already mentioned. Now, the Russian authorities claim that it was a malfunction, and though this might even be the case, it is another sign how Russian infrastructure is crumbling. The night before, the same happened in Chelyabinsk, and there are dozens of similar instances across the country where Russia is facing similar malfunctions. In terms of quantity, this hasn't been seen since the times of the Soviet Union. Lacking spare parts, personnel, and funding, which are a direct result of Russia's war against Ukraine, will further cripple Russia. And then you start piecing this together as if it is the loss of large parts of Russian internet wasn't enough. The Ukrainian intelligence GUR reports that it once again disabled another Russian cyber target. This time the servers of the Russian Ministry of Defense have been hit. The leaked documents show the documentation process and methodology, but it's unlikely that more sensitive information got retrieved as well. The worst part, however, is that the Russian counterintelligence must assume the worst and turn their systems completely upside down. That's a ton of work. According to the documents, the software which was breached was approved by the FSB. Then we hear things like this. And Trentelenko says, okay, Ukraine taking out Moscow power plant makes a lot more sense now, given that those troll farms are located, given where those troll farms are located. So whether they're St. Petersburg or Moscow, I don't know. There's probably troll farms in both. But Jay in Kiev says, and I can't verify his claims here, why are approximately 20% of all social media posts now originating from Russian troll farms, Russian bot networks, or Russia's paid influencers? I'd love to know what the source of that claim is. Man, I keep dying. I've got a live interview later. Right. So I'd love to know where the 20% comes from, because that's a pretty high number. If you think that some of those threads that I've shown you, whether it be, I don't know, Marjorie Taylor Greene, Jackson Hinkle, these kind of people, and you look down and you say, right, that's a Russian bot, or troll, that's a Russian troll. 20% of those voices are Russian trolls, and that is nuts. Because Russia is nothing but bombs and lies. It shows a GDP in billions of US dollars, comparing the growth in American GDP to Russian GDP, which has stayed stagnant since 2010. You know, if that was a government that was in charge, they'll be voted out, right? Because he's a dictator. That doesn't happen. But this is where it gets interesting. I haven't had any of the normal Russian trolls post on my tweets in the last 4 hours, or roughly since the power cuts and internet problems started in Russia. Could it be connected, or just a coincidence? And then lots of people sort of going in on this. You know, today Russia has a connectivity hiccup caused by DNS. I wonder if the world's social media is going to experience a global drop in troll posts as a result of that. A study can be made. And then people actually sort of mentioning how they have had less experience of trolls on their feeds, different platforms. So it's really interesting that you can connect. We had this last time when was it when the mutiny happened, and effectively the St. Petersburg Internet Research Agency troll factory that was owned by Prigozhin kind of shut down for a few days? Was it either the mutiny or when he was killed? And suddenly we had no trolls on the threads for like 3 or 4 days, and it was absolutely brilliant. and then they all came back after you would assume the contracts were exchanged and the Russian MOD took over the Internet Research Agency. And so we know that you're trolls. We know who you are on the threads, the trolls that are here day in, day out, paid for by Russian money to say what they say. And it's interesting when Ukraine are able to hit key infrastructure that trolls stop being active because they're dependent on that. Is it also the case that on Russian public holidays, trolls aren't so prevalent because they've all got a day off, so on and so forth. Anyway, let's go back to, I say back to because I did a breaking news video on this last night, back to the Zaluzhny Zelensky issue. Now, a couple of things to say about my video last night. A few of you said stop spreading rumors. This is just overt rumor mongering. This is all Russian propaganda. It wasn't, it isn't, and I think it's essentially been proved not to be as of today. I referred to the Financial Times. Some people were questioning the credibility of the Financial Times. In the UK, just to let you know, that the FT is routinely at the top of the reliability surveys. Interestingly, it's the Financial Times, the Guardian, and the Times all share kind of reliability in print media sources. BBC comes up fairly well as well. I know some people love to hate some of those media outlets, but in terms of reliability, that's why I go to particular sources, because I know that they have got a much better provenance with regard to fact checking. But anyway, the Financial Times is routinely seen at the top of the reliability ladder. But also, it was how it was reported and piecing together what I could find out from elsewhere online. Well, now today, first of all, Shashank Joshi of The Economist yesterday talked about the Financial Times piece and saying, quoting from that, Zelensky on Monday offered Zaluzhny, commander-in-chief of the armed forces, a new role, but the general refused. According to 4 people familiar with the discussion, Zelensky had not dismissed Zaluzhny and might not do so for some time, but 4 people with knowledge of the situation told the FT that a decision had been made in Zelensky's office to dismiss Zaluzhny from his post. The president then notified Zaluzhny that he would soon be dismissed and offered him a role as a government advisor. Okay, so then today, Shashank Joshi, I don't know if he wrote this piece, but The Economist has released an article. Quote, The Economist has been able to confirm that an early evening meeting took place on January the 29th, at which the president informed his general that he had decided to dismiss him. Read on for some of the details. Then there is further corroboration of this. So The Economist has confirmed it with their own sourcing. Then BBC Russia has confirmed it, corroborating our account, says Shashank Joshi, which is also consistent with the Financial Times' quote. And this is from BBC Russia. 3 people took part in the meeting, Zelensky, Zaluzhny, and Umarov. Zelensky said he had decided to dismiss Zaluzhny, adding a decree on this will be signed in the near future. BBC interlocutors in the highest corridors of Ukrainian power admit problems between the military and political leadership of the country began in April 2022, as soon as Russian troops withdrew from Kyiv. According to the BBC, although General Zaluzhny is not officially involved in a criminal case about improper organization of the defense of southern Ukraine, he had a conversation about this with investigators from the State Bureau of Investigation. One of the BBC's knowledgeable interlocutors said that the president, in a conversation with Zaluzhny on Monday, justified the need for his resignation with the desire to reboot the entire system of national security and defense agencies of Ukraine. BBC interlocutors in the Ukrainian defense sector say that in the current circumstances, the resignation of the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine looks more like a matter of time. Then, to add to this, the Times. So I've talked about the media sources that are deemed the most reliable in the UK. So Financial Times, The Times, BBC. And these are the ones saying this. So The Times offers yet more corroboration. Quote, according to senior officers, Zaluzhny was summoned to a face-to-face meeting with Zelensky. He was then asked to resign, according to three sources. When he refused, Zelensky said he would sign a decree dismissing him. Quote, Zaluzhny returned to his office and informed his deputies that he had been fired. I'm packing my things, he told one of his officers, who asked him about rumours about his resignation. Sources said that after Zaluzhny told his subordinates he would be leaving, senior commanders and international partners, including the US and the UK, expressed their concern. Times offers one more detail of what was said on Monday. He, Zaluzhny, told presidential advisors that their assessment of the military situation assessments were more positive than realistic. This is something that you can pick up from Simon Schuster's book on Zelensky, that actually, he genuinely thought at the beginning of the war that they were going to win the war. They were going to prevail with Western support a lot quicker than they have. In fact, they haven't prevailed, of course, yet. And this war is looking like it's going to go on for years. But that was not initially what Zelensky thought. And so Zelensky possibly has a much rosier view of what's going on. And that might translate across into the reluctance to mobilize, thinking that things are going better on the front line than maybe they really are, whereas Zaluzhny has a better grasp on that. That's the implication that you can take. That's what we can infer from that. So I'll add to that apparently Denis Davidov, who is Ukrainian, who has his own sources, says his own sources in Ukraine also confirm this. So I hope I'm not rumor mongering. I mean, all the top mainstream media news outlets, certainly from the UK, are reporting this with, it appears, independent confirmation of those claims. And, you can add Denis Davidov as well. So, I think there's probably something in this is I think what we can conclude. Now, one of the potential replacements for Zaluzhny that has been touted is Budanov. He's in charge of the intelligence at the moment. He says Russia's ongoing offensive is to die down by early spring, which is, not too far away. Ukrainian military intelligence chief said Russia's current offensive has not made any significant advances since its start in November 2023, and I would agree with that. It has been something of a failure, especially when you take into account what happened in October and November in Avdiivka, what we've seen in Sinkivka, and indeed in Krinky. Just huge losses. In Novomykhailivka, they have made small gains here and there, but at what cost? And yet, here we have Sladkov, a sort of Russian military blogger, saying, continuing to pour to his 1 million follower audience fantasies about creating World War II style formations to reach Odessa and Mykolaiv as soon as possible. The issue is that Russia is already operating at maximum capacity. This is what I think. My personal opinion is what Dmitry says here, that Russia is, while they might be making small gains here and there, they are operating at maximum capacity. They are managing to just about rotate. But if you're just about rotating forces in certain places, you are not operating within what you would normally plan for in terms of having excess reserve troops in order to effectively rotate consistently to give your troops morale boosts and freshness, so on and so forth. They've not been able to rotate in many places over a long period of the war, to the point where the morale is rock bottom. Troops are complaining, and they're just about rotating now as things are sort of maybe calming down a little bit, and they're being able to recruit back at home. But this is maximum capacity activity, and they are losing massive amounts of equipment. As Budanov said earlier, as just referred to, the offensive operation is already ongoing, and it started in November, actually October, really. In fact, just before October, with little to show for it so far. So October, November, December, January, 4 months, and the Russians have lost how much stuff and gained how little territory. It's particularly amusing reading fantasies about Transnistria. So Sladkov's talking about getting to Transnistria, this kind of not even maximalist. They're not talking about gaining, occupying the whole of Ukraine. This is about getting to the Transnistrian border through Mykolaiv and taking Odessa. Ain't never going to happen. See how long it's taken to take Bakhmut, and you're working at maximum capacity now. So, I'm very kind of positive about Ukraine's position, given well, I guess I'm very negative about Russia's position. So, as he said, it's amusing reading fantasies about getting to Transnistria, and NATO apparently, as some of the Russians are saying, oh, NATO are going to take over Kaliningrad when they can't even provide enough ammunition for Ukraine. But nonetheless, this is what they build their propaganda on. I would say you wouldn't need that much artillery ammunition to take Kaliningrad. I mean, most of it would be done by the air if you really wanted to do that. NATO could do that in a matter of days if they really wanted. I don't think they're going to want to do that though. And then all that kind of idea about Russia's internet being down and the stuff I've already said, and then moving on to Russia charging 2 teenagers in a pro-Ukrainian rail sabotage incident. I've talked about this before, and I've talked about how this is a low risk, high reward, or not particularly high, but it's a very low risk, quite medium reward, and it's just well worth doing. You pay Russian people who need the money to go and set fire to relay boxes, and you are not risking any of your own people. You're not even risking those Russians particularly, because it should be fairly easy to do without getting caught, especially relay boxes and nowhere. And even if they do get caught, from a really mercenary point of view, not mercenary is probably the wrong word, but from a really kind of unemotional point of view, these are just kind of Russian citizens from a Ukrainian point of view. So the police have claimed that a Ukrainian partisan contacted the teenagers online and offered them $150 set fire to a relay box. Now, I previously was saying it's really low risk. It's going to cost you like $1,000. Even cost that. The claim is it's $150 to set fire to a relay box. I mean, goodness me, that's got to be a good return on investment for the Ukrainians, which control signals for train operators. So it's sad news for those 2 Russian teenagers, but it just gives you a bit of idea about how this is taking place and relatively how easy it is for the Ukrainians to do. So there you go. And the last thing I was going to show you is this that someone sent me. Now, this is an old video because the earth is sandy, and there are pine cones on the floor, etc., etc. You can go. I'll link this in the description below. It's a long video, 6.5 minutes. It's pretty horrific. So I don't advise you watch it. But if you want an understanding of what the Russian army is like, I think what's happened here, it's useful reading the Reddit thread below. I think what's happened is some Russian soldiers have beaten up a Wagner person. They pick him out of a tent, and he looks like he's got brain injuries. He's relieved himself in his trousers. So he's not functioning, and I think the claim is they've been hitting him with their gun butts for like 3 hours, but that's an exaggeration. I don't know. So then the Wagner come back, and then they start beating up Ukrainian soldiers, and it's just vicious. And there are people beating up other people, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is what the whole Russian army is just built on terror and seems like largely a lack of morale and camaraderie, and that's what happens when you're not really fighting for anything. These guys are invading a country where they're not fighting for something that means something to them personally. The Ukrainians are unified by a sense of national pride, a sense of identity, a sense of something positive. They're fighting for their friends, they're fighting for their family, they're fighting for their culture, they're fighting against the aggressive invaders who are coming in and challenging all that is good and right about their nation. And the Russians that are coming in are fighting because they've been force mobilized. They're fighting because they think it might be a route to pardon from prison. They're fighting because it might be an opportunity for social mobility. There's nothing like hugely unifying, and there's no great cause that they're fighting for. So you put all these people together with all of those kind of disparate reasons for fighting that aren't particularly, they're not going to drive you on in an abstract sense, and there isn't some greater cause you're fighting for, and this is what happens, and you're having to all these people together by brute force, rather than through them wanting to stay united, to follow orders, and do what their commander ordered because they respect their commander, not bringing people up and together. It's washing people down and ruling them by fear, and then them doing what you tell them to do. If they don't, they get put in a pit or shot or this or that. And I think videos like this really do give you evidence that it's chalk and cheese, these two armies. But you can go and watch it if you so desire. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. Please like, subscribe, and share. I'm so sorry about my voice. I will soldier on, I think, because I've got a lot to say today, and I've got that live stream coming later. Anyway, take care. Speak soon.